So, so what that ended up with was we designed the capacity to use the Kumu interface and store data so that we can answer that question of who was in the network last year versus who's in the network now. And not only who was in the network or not in the network, but what were their relationships to each other then versus now. So, and how that works is Kumu just records when a person enters the network, they have the initial date, and then whenever people change their relationship status, sumApp tracks those dates, the dates they change the relationship status. So every single one of those dates is just held perpetually in sumApp. And so if you want to go in and, let's say in the first year of your map, you might want to track times quarterly. You might want to say who was first quarter, second quarter, third, what's changed in the first 4 quarters. So you would set your time tags up for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. But then 5 years in, you don't want 4 times 5. You don't want 20 time tags. You don't want to be doing it at the quarterly level. So in sumApp, you can just go in and you can create your time frames, and those can change. So you don't have to know ahead of time what time frames you're going to want to track, because I know already it's going to change over time. So I don't expect you to have to figure that out ahead of time. I just designed it so that you could go in and reconfigure them. So say in year 1, you've got quarters, and then year 2, you might want half years, or in some cases, it's like before the annual meeting and then after the annual meeting. We can just keep changing those because sumApp has tracked the actual times. And so it just reslices and dices them, reclusters them based on the time frame that you set, and is changeable. So what it looks like in action, and this is how we've been doing this for a long time. And Jim, for some reason today, your node just keeps piling right on top of my node. We know exactly the same people, I think, and which is fine. But at one point I thought it looked like I had 2 rings, and I was like, I'm so confused. Anyway, so I just had to move that. But so how that looks in action is, and I'm not going to go into how to do this aside from as much as I just said today. I think we'll do a training on that soon. But this is how it looks. So we started this map in 2019. And as you can see, there were a handful of people, some of whom are still right here. And then this is what it, and we can see that let's say who's that? Okay, that's not going to change. But like, let's say in 2019, I felt like I had a generative interaction relationship with Mary, and the same with Ryan. It was the of the 3 connection questions we have, it was the 2 ranking one. And then in 2020, we have some more people. In 2021, we had more people. 22. So if you're working with a foundation and you have funding for your network, funders love this. This is basically the core thing, that if they're going to invest in a network, they want to know that you're actually building collaborative relationships. You're not just building an email list. You're actually helping to develop connections over time. So they love this little thing. They get all excited whenever you show it to them. And then I'm just going to look at my relationship to Mary. So in the beginning was a generative interaction, but now it's collaborative. Now we collaborate. So you can see that we went from having a medium strong relationship to a stronger relationship, which is a subjective measure. Okay, I'm going to stop. And then the last thing to notice about this view, and this view is just using the sort of the built-in functionality of Kumu combined with our time tagging. And so another thing to note is that you can, as we're going through the years, Kumu is tracking the number of elements, the number of connections, the density of the whole, of all the people that are showing up, the reciprocity and the average degree, etc. I'm going to say one more functional thing, and then I'm going to stop and see if people have questions. So if I go to 2024 and I filter on, let's say, says this is social system mapping is a main component of their work, so they're highly invested in it, then I'll also, the nodes will be showing up here. So we'll have a subset over time, changing over time. So that's all I just wanted to point out, that the filters work with time tags. Okay, I want to pause. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and just see, especially for the new people, what questions you have, if there's any clarifying questions or sort of basic questions about time tagging that are coming up for you. Seeing David shaking his head no. Molly's looking like she's got it. Denise.
Yeah, no questions from me. Just to me, this seems like such a core feature of the map that adds such value. So I'm very interested. Love it.
Thanks. Yay. Great. Okay. So I'm trying to remember.
Christine, are you going to ask the old timers if they have questions?
Question?
I do. Could you walk through how you set up time tagging on sumApp and visualize it on Kumu?
That's what I just said I'm not going to do. I don't want to walk through the how-to right now.
Oh, okay.
Because I want to spend time playing with it, and I know that will
take.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Does anybody else who's been around for a while have any questions that are coming up that they feel?
It's not a question, it's more a comment. And I'm so embarrassed to say this. I've never seen that view. I don't know why.
Wow.
I've never seen it. Like, I've heard it, but I've never actually seen it. So this was amazing. So yeah.
Well,
I keep hearing about it, but it was just fantastic. So
okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes, Denise. So I'll just say I'm not very good at tracking the chat when I'm talking and presenting. So, but I did see, Denise, that you asked if we'll do that in the future, and we will do a training on time tagging at some point in the not too distant future. Okay. So, and Denise, I just wanted to show you, so I came back to can you see my screen? Okay, it's right here. So for the new people, if you're not familiar, this side panel, if you haven't selected somebody, so as soon as you click on the background or unselect, oops, the side panel has information about the whole map, and these are norms, these are design norms that we use for our maps, and then we'll have a list of links to different views, and so time tag views right there. Okay, Denise, I'm glad that you get to see it.
I just probably didn't play with it. I was like, ignored it. I was like, it's great, and I want it on my map, but we'll talk about that after. Okay, go on.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to remember now. I want to tell a little bit of why I came up with this, the change that I made. And so we've been, we made this map partly when we first built sumApp. I thought, well, we need to have a sandbox that people can play, or they need to be able to put themselves on a map so that they can even understand the tool set, because it's requires so much, unless you actually have the hands-on experience, it's really hard to figure out how to even think about it. And then we had a bit of a community practice, and I just figured, well, it's time for us to actually make a map and invite people to put themselves on it so that they can at least have an experience. So part of the map of this map is simply for people who are curious about social system mapping to have a walkthrough experience, which if you're not on it, you're welcome to add yourself. At the same time, there are the questions on it are meant to help actually, people make strategic connections, find someone to help them learn stuff, sort of be the scaffolding for our developing community of practice. So it's not a total just junk data sandbox. It was designed to help us figure ourselves out. And it took a while from there before we actually started to use it in a intentional way. Like I say, all our maps should be used. And so as we've been using it more, questions come up about, like, we'll look at a map and feel like everybody on this map is, wants to be part of our community of practice. And in this particular context, that's not necessarily true. In this particular context, many of the people on this map were just curious about social system mapping. And I want to keep them on the map because they tell a story of how we've grown. And because if we keep taking people off, then our time tagging thing won't really show how time tagging works. So I have chosen to leave people on. They can take themselves off if they want, but for the most part, leaving people on. But that means that we have a lot of, in some ways, a little bit of, not as human beings, but as map members, a little bit of dead weight in the map, or, people who are on there, but who won't respond to anybody for any reason because social system mapping is not on their radar anymore. And they're not engaged. So I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, how do we be clear, how do we help ourselves understand what we're looking at? And also thinking about how people sort of evolve through over time in relationship to this community practice. And then I was looking at the time tagging views. Oh, because I'm writing this chapter for a book about social system mapping and you wanted time tagging views. And so all of these things sort of work together, going together in my mind. And then I thought, oh, I know what I want. I want to be able to see in a time tagging view, not just the overall change to the whole of the network, but who's been here longer and who's been here, who's newer. I can't see that from this view. I just see new people getting added on, but unless I could remember who was here before, which is cognitive, not going to happen. So this is what I asked him to do. That. Can everybody see my new map?
Mm-hmm.
So now what we're looking at is people who were here in 2019 are colored darkly, and then a little more lightly, and then a little more lightly. So at each year, each time tag that we're representing has a different color. So they're shaded, getting lighter and lighter for the newer members. And so now we can look. So I just thought, oh, that would be interesting. And I was looking at it, and then I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, because now I can see, like, of the people, like so obviously there's, very dark shaded nodes at the center who have stuck around for a long time, but there's also some very dark shaded nodes, people who were with us, or who were at least interested in the very beginning, and who don't have many connections. And so what we can conclude from that is that they didn't stick around because they didn't make a lot of connections. Whereas if they're, so these, like these very pale ones, are people who just joined the network this year. And now we can start to see who's getting closer and closer, or who's building more and more connections within, like, we can start to see the newer people engaging because they'll be getting closer, and the older people disengaging because they'll be getting further away. So I was playing with that, and then I was thinking, oh, this now would be really interesting. I found myself, which doesn't happen very often, clicking on nodes, like I know Anita, and I was just sort of starting to click on nodes, and then I was seeing, oh yeah, I know, like there's 3 other people in the network that I know that Anita knows because I've introduced them and I've been told that they had a meeting. And so I was seeing this as a way of encouraging people to come back and add their connections, seeing this as a way of starting to notice who was moving in which direction and being able to think about outreach or more encouragement or things like that. So that's my big share for today, and I'm going to put a link to this in the chat. And yep, and then thanks for sharing the link to putting yourself on the map, Kara. I'm going to refresh this. So if you've put yourself on in the last 10 minutes, you'll show up here shortly, if not now already. And now we'll be able to see you quickly because you'll be, if I'm in the 2024 time tag view, you'll be, no. Anyway, so questions, ideas, and I'm going to stop sharing. First of all, let's look at clarifying questions. Is there anything that anyone isn't clear on and that would help them follow going forward? Tom.
Yeah, so the data that's driving that is what people put in, right? Like if I'm putting in connections, then it's going to change. Now, understand, I'm thinking about the moving closer and further. I mean, I get the starting date.
Yeah.
But you just kind of made an interesting observation that you believe there's people that's connected that might be in closer, but they haven't actually gone and updated the map.
Right.
So it's a measure of partly connection, but also partly people's activity.
Yep. Engagement.
I would be curious, even if that was the thing that it's calculated almost as like map engagement. Like,
yeah.
That's where my brain was going.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, yeah, mine too. And that's where I started to realize, like, I look at a map, I look at these maps all the time, and I look at our map pretty regularly. And I often feel like, I know that person knows more people, or I know that person has met with so-and-so, or I know those two even worked on a project together. But I know that I'm only seeing that because I'm poking in that moment, and I don't have an overall way of sort of identifying where that's happening. And this color scheming made me realize, oh, now I can kind of like zoom out and say, and just like look for the lightest ones. I mean, it was a way of helping me start to see where, yeah, not only the relationships are or aren't happening, but the reporting, the engagement isn't happening, and where there might be room to nicely nudge that is in an inviting way. It's just like if I said to Denise, I know you know those two people because we've talked about that. And I bet they would appreciate if you acknowledge that. Or just that's a different ask than go update your data over and over.
Yeah, and to be clear, I really like this view. This is great. As a matter of fact, in my mind, it was like so foundational. Like, this is great. So I was already like, where else could we go with it?
Yeah. And that's
Others-
why, as soon as I saw it, I started to feel like, oh, I want to share this with everybody like soon, because I think like you all will have thoughts about how can we use this and how can this be help us do sense making with our maps, etc. So I thought you'd be excited and have ideas that that I won't have. So other clarifying, Mary, you're muted.
The complication of time where 3 years ago, I may have had a one-to-one conversation with someone, but now, but haven't been in contact since then. So I'm trying, when I update the map, to move that person to an acquaintance, but not everyone is, we don't have a sense of that this is current.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah. It is complicated, and there is really, I've been thinking about that. Because one of the things that in June's maps used to be, there were 5. Like I've collaborated with them recently, or collaborated with them, but not in the last year. I've had generative interaction, I mean, different labels, but there was a time dimension. And that still wouldn't guarantee that people who don't come in and update their maps, it won't make them come in and lower the ranking or you know, make it a pass thing. But if you have said, I used to collaborate with Christine, but not in the last year, and I haven't, then we can kind of look at that relationship and go, probably Mary's right. Because if one says collaborating and one says collaborating in the past, and we haven't seen the other person update recently, then yeah, it doesn't solve all the problems, because the engagement issues are just the way they are. But yeah.
Yeah.
Other clarifying questions? Yeah, Molly.
Well, this is really helping me understand, especially the reporting piece is so critical. So I don't have an answer, but how do you motivate someone to report? Just like how do you motivate them to engage in the first place? But that's not a question. And my question is not so much specifically about time stamping. It's more about the graphic meaning of the map. So I can hold it or I can ask it.
Let's go. Let's just, if you hold it for just a moment, does anybody else have clarifying? I just want to get everyone clear before we move to more conceptual stuff. Looks like we're clear. Okay, go ahead, Molly. Thanks for holding.
Okay. Well, I had this question anyway, but then it came up again when I was looking at the color coding indicating year of entry or what have you. Maybe this is, I'm missing a key piece. I'm trying to understand when I looked at the circle with the different colors indicating the different, you know, moving from a deep red to a yellow and then to a neutral color, achromatic. There was a lot of yellow clustered over here. And when I look at the map and try to think north, south, east, west and such, I try to ask myself, why would someone be located, you know, at which outer edge of that circle? Is there meaning that I'm supposed to understand when I look at that circle? And so it's location and then it's distance from, and I know there's something going on there. Those are two different things, but I'll just start with, I definitely saw lots of yellow in the southeast quadrant, southwest, and I just thought, okay, there's something maybe I'm supposed to be decoding that I'm not.
Okay, so the quadrants are, there is meaning in their location, but it is not about the quadrants. So the things will clump towards, so there's, if you think of gravity, so the more, you know, the bigger a node is, the more gravity, the more they're going to pull together. and they
Mhm.
pull towards the others they know.
Right.
So if there were a bunch of, and if I look at the map in front of me, the version in front of me right now, the yellows look very spread out.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they just sort of land based on their proximity to one another for the most part.
So based on proximity, as in proximity means degrees of knowing and degrees of interaction
Yeah,
means more proximity.
yeah. And if you hit the B button for bounce, they'll sort of readjust themselves. And so it's kind of has to, if they're clumping in a way that, so part of it is getting a sense of, there are definitely clustery, like obviously most people know me. And so they're tighter around me. And then Jim is if everybody were updating their map all the time, Jim is the next most known person in the network, and he knows a lot of the people I know, so he ends up sitting right next to me in the map. But
Yeah.
so if I saw something unusual, so there's partly just like a getting used to what it normally does, because every time it loads, it's landing based on an algorithm. And sometimes it just like the fates make it land in a kind of a funny way. And if I see that, I'd hit the B key so that bouncing means it sort of juggles everything and then it'll land in its sort of closer to normal way.
Okay. And the out is the furthest out circle. I noticed sometimes there's no line at all.
Yeah.
And that's kind of organizing people around that outer circle.
Yeah, because they're not, so they have more pull towards each other if there's the stronger the line is. And if there's no line, we still have a certain gravity sort of thing that pulls them towards the group so that they're not just flying. Otherwise, sometimes if you have your settings, and this is a thing to keep in mind, is as your network grows, when you've got 10 people on the map, your settings will do a layout in one way, but when you've got 1,000 people on the map, your settings might be weird. So you have to change your gravity and your repulsion and your connection lengths in certain ways so that you can see everybody and they're not too piled on top of each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Jim.
I guess it's a clarifying question. So time tagging works off of the last change to either a link or an entity. And can you time box it? Say, I just want to look at the changes between here and here. I'm not sure what it gets triggered off of.
It gets triggered off of, if you add a node, so let's say you load a new member into the map, like you put them in either manually or as an admin from the backend. You either load them from a spreadsheet or you put them in manually. That node will have a creation date. Then when the person clicks on the link and opens up the instance of their own instance of sumApp for themselves, that will be their initial date. And then there's a last date, which means that's the last time they did anything. The time tags we don't start time tagging based on creation date. So you have to, when you're doing your filters, you have to realize that if you're time tagging, you might remove people who've never done anything that you've loaded, but that's sort of a technical aside. The nodes are added to the map based on the year, their initial date. So the year they entered the network, we're tracking that. And that's all but every year, if they're still in the population, so let's say you're in the population, you enter in 2019 and you're still on the list in 2020, we add that time tag because that's the only logical thing to do if you grapple with since we can't control what other people are doing. So anyway, so your node, based on the way I've set up the time tags now, has all 5 years as time tag 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 23, 24, 20. Is that clear about the nodes? The connections are a different story.
Okay, actually it's not. So we've got the creation date and the initial date, but then how does subsequent dates get time tagged? How does 2024 get
It just inherits,
satisfied?
it just assumes that you're still in the network.
Okay,
So whatever,
that's the time tagging feature that you've added to this, which is,
Yeah,
are
yeah.
they there or not? Yes.
Right. Yeah,
Got
yeah. So every year for the elements, it's, are they there or not? And it basically, if they're there, they're there. And then we just assume they're there for every other year. So
And
that's,
so then the question about the link,
okay.
how does the,
Yeah. So that's more complex. And so every time, so sumApp is tracking every single change to that first question, the ranking question. It's not tracking the date of every change of every question, because then it would be sort of tracking like every time that would be like exponentially tons of data that we would be saving and having to manage. So we limited it to the ranking question. But so every time I change my connection to you, if I say, oh, right now I just know you, now right now we're having generative interact, now we're collaborating. Now, whenever I do that, sumApp is tracking that date. So if I go in every day and make a change to my relationship with you, which no one would, but if I did, sumApp would have every single timestamp for that change for the relationship. Then when I add, is that clear what I'm saying so far? Okay. So then when we put a time frame, let's say we just take we'll just say 2 years. So year one and year two. Let's say I've made 10 changes in my relationship to you in between the first year and the beginning of the third year. So I go in and I say, okay, these are the years, these are the 2 time frames. It will just notice, we'll just go based on it was like these changes fit in year 1 and these changes fit in year 2, and whatever the last one was in year 1 is the strength of the connection, and whatever the last one was in year 2 is the strength of the connection for year 2. Does that make sense?
yeah, and is it just the strength of the connection, or is it all the connection questions, the state of whatever connection questions we have in there?
No, that's what I was just saying. We only track the change to the first one, the ranking one, because all the other changes, first of all, if I'm changing like most of the other questions are not the fundamental, how strong is the relationship question. It's not what most of, I mean, like that amount of data is not going to be visualizable in a meaningful way. It's not going to be, it's just like overkill for the map. It's also overkill for what sumApp can track, because we would have, that's what I was saying, exponentially more data to, like, if we had to keep a timestamp of every time someone changed anything in any question, that would just, like, sumApp, the whole storage would just be way more. And so it's just that first question.
Great, thanks.
Now that we've gone this far into the weeds about the specifics, I'm going to add another thing that I want everybody to think about. Now, I don't need you to remember this or like to get the actual facts of it, but if you are doing your own time tagging, there's a way you can get into trouble with your metrics. And I want to make sure that you know to ask somebody for help when you do this, so that you don't get yourself into trouble for metrics. It's kind of technical, and I'm wondering if maybe I should not go down this path right now. I'm going to go down this path right now. Briefly. And Jim, I'm wondering, you stopped your video and I'm wondering if that means, because I think I want you to know this.
No, I'm visiting and people are leaving, so I'm going to have to leave here, and I'll just come back to the recording.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you, though.
I want
Thanks
you
for
to know
thinking
this.
about me. See y'all.
So in Kumu, so a person's nodes, how do I say this? So when we time tag, let's say me and Jim, there's only one me and there's only one Jim in the data set. But if we time tag, we have to have a different connection for every time period. So from me to Jim, there are 5 connections sitting in sumApp right now based on the time tagging, because there's the time, there's what I said about him in 2019, then there's what I said about him. There's a from and a to for 2019, a from and a to for 2020, a from and a to for 2021, with a different ranking for each of those years. Because in Kumu, you can't say if this and this, you can only say if this. So if I want to change them, we had to make it separate connections. So you don't really need to know the technical reason, but if you do time tagging and you have forgotten this, my suggestion is simply look at how many connections you have, and if they are way bigger than that makes sense, then know that they're throwing your metrics off, and come to our Slack and say, what's going on? Why do I have 80 million connections when I only have 5 nodes? And I'll say, oh, that's because blah, blah, blah. And you need to filter out blah, blah, blah. And here's how you do that, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll be good. So that's the one sneaky piece about time tags is the way we had to, because of the way Kumu works, the way we had to replicate the connections for every time frame. So questions about that, or just thoughts about any other comments or ideas or what's coming up? Tom?
Yeah, so on the map you just sent us, I'm looking at 2024, it's 262 elements, 3,344 connections. That's not that problem you just talked about, right? You've
Correct. We have fixed for that.
figured that out, but that's
Yes.
not native to other ones, or?
Any map that Tim and I put a time tagging view in,
Okay.
we take care of that.
Got it.
And we try, usually when someone's working on time tagging, they ping us in Slack, they'll say, how do I do this? And we'll give them some instructions, and then I will give them this little lecture about be very careful. But we don't have it in any particular place because we haven't really created a time tagging instructional, how to actually do it. And I have occasionally come across someone who had made a map on their own, didn't ask for help, which is very self-sufficient and great, but
Right.
and I've gone, oh God, there's a mess. I have to tell them there's a mess. Yeah. So just hold that in your heart. I might accidentally unintentionally make a mess when I do time tagging. Just hold that much information in your heart, and then just say, Christine, what was it I'm not supposed to do? And then I can help you sort it.
I put a big red caution in my notes.
Good. And we'll get this documented at some point, but I'm really interested if anybody's having ideas about how they might use this, how the different colors might be helpful in a context that they're working in. I'm guessing that means we just have to, when we have a map that we want to do time tagging. Who's Mary?
Maybe it would be helpful in terms of difference. So if you were part of a network or a collaborative group that had mostly the same people,
Mhm.
where there wasn't a mix of different time periods. It would give you a clue that you're not bringing in new people,
Yes.
or it's mostly the same old group.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. That dawned on me that, like, in a ideal world, we would want to see at the core multiple shadings of longevity. So we would be getting new ideas. We would be getting new people.
Mhm.
Then we would also be having people who've been around for a while, who have the history and the consistency. Yeah, it's a good one. Other thoughts?
Well, I have a thought, but I'm actually starting to realize that this may reveal my ignorance around what's possible with creating a map for a group. If you wanted to indicate, let's say you had some as a group wanted to become more diverse in terms of gender balance or racial complexion of the group, and not just look at the interaction, but also, or maybe even look at the interaction across perceived or actual boundaries. That's too, could you see that over time? But I don't know if that's true or not, because now I'm understanding that we're mostly just looking at, do people interact?
So what we could do, I mean, that's a valid, so we can, in some contexts, I mean, we can already look at the diversity in relation to the structure of the network by color coding the nodes based on, like, if it's a racial diversity that we're looking for, we've asked a question about race, and then we color code the nodes, we can see that easily just by looking at the color coding of the nodes. We could, if we wanted to, this would be visually challenging. But for instance, if we make the nodes do the shading of the nodes the way we did here, we could put a shadow, which is a ring around each node, representing another hang on, I have to make this thing stop showing me its previews. Okay, so we could put a shadow around the nodes that would in a contrasting color based on race, if that was the dimension we were looking at. And then we could see both who are the new people of the various backgrounds and who are the long-term people, and we could be trying to design for both. And it would be visually really hard to look at, because you'd be trying to discern, because it's even hard just to look at 5 colors or 6 colors and discern them. And if we had a whole nother color palette around each node, but we could do that. We could also do things like have the time tagging, and then this is getting into data visualization, but do a showcase view where you highlight based on different dimensions. So time tagging plus showcasing could be a really interesting cross-reference for looking at both the longevity of members, as well as the structure of the network, as well as the important demographic pieces. So yeah, it might have been too long-winded a response, but.
No, that made sense. Thank you. The last part, I could visualize if there were be a way to isolate what you're trying to understand changed over time. But yeah, I don't know how that would be created on the back end, but I can envision it.
Yeah. Well, that's your Kumu technical skills, is how that would,
Okay.
that's just a piece of learning. It's a design, understanding Kumu code, and you can also always go to our Slack and say what you're trying to do, and Tim is our mapper, and my partner, and he's happy to help.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Christine, what I found interesting with this visualization is I just centered on my own name, and kind of the question that Molly was looking at. I wasn't really so much didn't find it remarkable. I wasn't so much interested in looking at people in terms of their gender or race, but I noticed that I'm connected to a lot of old timers, I would call it, or old heads or wisdom keepers. So I find that interesting, like who I've connected to, I guess, because I went to people who have been on the map for a long time. And then I have a couple people that I've connected to since I've been on the map. So it kind of tells me what type of map member am I? Am I also helping to grow the map, or am I just extracting from the map like the knowledge of other people, or is it a mix? So, and I guess in that sense, in having the color coding, I don't think it would have been as readily apparent to me that, you know, I used the knowledge that's there at first to deep dive and ask help, and I know how I know everybody. And then I did add a few people, but it's also telling me a reminder to invite some more people in so that I have some lighter colors as it goes on. So that's just one way I guess people could use it and thinking through it. So just, yeah, which is cool. I like it. It's neat.
Yeah, and it makes sense that that's where you would be, because part of what happens in this community practice is that people who've been around for a long time, their interest is far more in reaching out and connecting with new people and helping new people learn than it is in advancing their own learning, because now their learning edge is seeing what other people are doing and hearing what other people are, what challenges they have. So there's also amount of people probably people reaching out to you or offering you help. But yeah, that rolling that forward and how that happens can start to be seen with this view, which is a cool observation. So I'll just say if you want to stick around for an extra half hour, we usually do, and I'm curious, and I'm feeling like we should wrap up. And I'm curious, is anybody planning on sticking around? I know many of you need to jump off. Okay, then we won't do the sticking around thought. Kara, do you want to just make announcements and then we'll close for the day?
Yes, let me pop that page open really quick here. It's my favorite date to do announcements because the dates all make sense and they go in order. So the first Monday is coming up. That'll be July 1st for our sense making session. And then on our second Mondays is on ramps as usual. That'll be July 8th. We are still looking for a map, and I'll just keep putting that out there in case anybody wants to offer something up or know somebody that they know is working on something that they could poke perhaps. And then on the third Monday, we will have our deep dive. This time, Tina Beck will be coming back. She had an event that I thought would inform the session better to come in July. So hopefully that will also have some more learnings as a result. And then Amy will be doing our tech talk for the fourth Monday, and that is Tim's second part of the header maker with existing data. And I will put links in the chat.
And Rebecca, I just thought of you in the on-ramp. So what we did last time in the on-ramp was we didn't have a map. And I decided that rather than me sharing one of the usual suspects of our 3 shareable maps, I'd invite someone who wants practice walking through a map. And Tom presented the map to some new people as a practice. He presented our social system. I think it was ours. And anyway, that was great. And that was, I think he said that was helpful for him. So I just thought of, when there's an on-ramp but we don't know the mapper, that could be an opportunity if you want practice walking people through a map. Because as I think many of us know, it's more challenging than it seems
to do it
in front of people.
Great to practice. Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Let's do our goodbye ritual. Let's unmute, and glad to see everybody here. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you
Bye.
today. Have a
Bye.
good rest of your day.
Good.